On my way to the hospital after the car accident, the medical team used my phone to try calling Charles Anderson more than 20 times, but he didn't answer any of them. Before he blocked me, he sent one final message. "What's got you all worked up now? Caroline's family needs help, and I'm stepping in for her. Stop trying to cause problems at a time like this." When I regained consciousness at the hospital, I learned that I had almost lost a limb due to the accident. My first instinct was to reach for my phone to call Charles Anderson. Once I unlocked it, I noticed messages from Caroline, starting from the day of the accident. "I heard you were the one who got hit. I'm so sorry. Charles is Zach's lawyer. He saw I wasn't eating because of Zach, so he cooked for me. Charles mentioned you didn't want to settle. He saw me crying and promised to do everything he could to get Zach off the hook." That's when it hit me. The marriage I fought so hard for was a complete joke. By the time I woke up, 2 days had passed since the accident. Bianca, who had somehow learned about what happened, had been by my side in the hospital the entire time. "Where's Charles Anderson?" "I haven't seen him since I got here," she asked, irritated after the doctor finished checking on me. Still thinking about how close I came to losing a limb, I asked Bianca for a charger to call Charles. When I turned on my phone, it buzzed repeatedly. I couldn't help but wonder if there was a message from him, but one name stood out: Caroline. She had sent me 8 texts. Although I had exchanged numbers with her out of politeness, we had never spoken. She was often the cause of arguments between Charles and me, the instigator. Yet, something compelled me to open the messages and read them one by one. A sudden sob escaped from my throat. "I heard you were the one who got hit. I'm so sorry. Charles is Zach's lawyer. He saw I wasn't eating because of Zach, so he cooked for me." I immediately dialed Charles's number, but the voice on the other end reminded me that he had blocked me after the accident. The medical staff had tried calling him over 20 times, with no success. I initially thought he blocked me because of my supposed interference with Caroline, but in reality, he just wanted to cut me off. I glanced at Caroline's texts again, realizing that the person who hit me was her brother, Zach. While I was unconscious for 2 days, Charles had been at her place and was now planning to defend the man responsible for nearly costing me a limb. Bianca, noticing my change in mood, leaned over to look at my phone. She knew about Caroline. After seeing the messages, she was livid. "I called Charles just once, and he blocked me. So he's been with that woman the whole time?" Bianca cursed him for 3 minutes straight. Her fury made me realize why I had been tolerating someone who didn't care about me. This marriage, the way it had turned out, should have ended long ago. After Bianca finished venting, I asked her to find me 2 lawyers. The car swerved into my lane and hit me. The other driver should be fully responsible, and I suspect he was driving under the influence. I've missed the best chance to collect evidence because I've been unconscious for 2 days. Knowing Charles, I wouldn't be surprised if he bends the rules to protect Caroline. Also, get me a divorce lawyer. I'm ready to leave Charles. Bianca was stunned by my calm demeanor, but quickly took out her phone and began contacting top lawyers in Manhattan. The following day, I was lying in bed when I heard a familiar voice near the door. Though the door was closed and the conversation outside was faint, I could make out that Charles, who was representing Zach, had come to speak with my lawyer about a possible private settlement. My lawyer knew my position and would likely reject the offer. I waited, ready to throw the divorce papers in Charles's face, but the only person who walked in was my lawyer. Bianca visited after work, and when she heard that Charles had been at the door but didn't bother to check on me, she cursed him again. After hours of mentally preparing myself, I finally accepted that Charles didn't care about me. "Just one more minute until the hearing starts. The plaintiff still hasn't arrived. This is blatant disrespect for the court, Your Honor. Please take that into consideration." Charles's voice abruptly stopped when he saw me. "What are you doing here? This isn't the place for you to stir up trouble." As I passed him, he grabbed my wheelchair, preventing me from moving. "Why aren't you resting at home? Why are you causing a scene?" His persistent lowered voice didn't elicit a response from me. Bianca pushed his hand away, guiding me to the plaintiff's seat. Let the trial begin." As expected, Charles was one of Manhattan's top criminal defense lawyers. In the simple pre-trial phase, he quickly recovered from his shock and composed himself. Despite spending 2 months preparing for this moment, Hearing that Charles was defending Zach still made my eyes water. After the judge adjourned the session, Caroline immediately ran into Charles's arms. Zach, rubbing his wrist, approached me and kicked my wheelchair. So what if you rejected the mediation? Charles is the best. Caroline called his name softly before following Charles out. Jessica, I'm so sorry. If we had known you were the one who got injured, we would have avoided taking this to court. Her eyes glistened with arrogance, showing no fear that I'd confront her lies. Finally, Bianca rushed over and, seeing Charles, pointed at him. So you didn't even check if the plaintiff was your own wife when you saw her name? You're really defending that trash? Charles' face darkened, but his gaze stayed on me. Hearing Bianca's words didn't affect me. The version of me that once loved Charles was long gone. I pulled out the divorce papers I had prepared earlier and handed them to him. You don't have to pretend in front of me anymore. Just sign this. And from now on, I don't care where you go or who you're with. Caroline gasped when she saw the divorce papers. Jessica, Charles has been so focused on Zach lately that he might have neglected you. But divorcing him over this seems extreme. I hadn't planned to engage with her, but I couldn't hold back. You need him, right? I'm divorcing him so you can have him. You should be happy. Charles flipped through the divorce agreement, preparing to respond, but I cut him off. If you don't want your affair to go public, sign it now. After that, I gestured for Bianca to take me home. Jessica, there's been a misunderstanding. Let me explain when I get back. Even then, Charles remained by Caroline's side. I knew after this, he would go back to her and comfort her family. Who would believe it? A husband who hadn't been home in 2 months, hadn't cared for his wife, and only showed up to defend his ex-girlfriend's brother in court. Lying in the hospital, I had wondered countless times how Charles would react when he found out the injured person was me, Jessica. But he didn't even step into my room to confirm it. The fact that he hadn't contacted me for 2 months made me give up entirely. My only remaining hope was that he didn't know who the plaintiff was, but his actions in court and his reaction to the divorce papers made it clear. Charles saw me as nothing more than a stranger. After being discharged, I moved back to my parents' house and hired a nanny, Becky, to help with my daily needs. Charles called just as I had finished a shower, with Becky's assistance. Jessica, how long has it been since you've been home? The dust could choke someone. I propped my injured leg up on a chair and relaxed. So, you do remember you have a home? Charles was momentarily thrown by my words and softened his tone. Let's not get into that now. Where are you? Let's talk. Thinking he wanted to discuss the divorce, I told him my location. When he arrived and saw Becky, his face soured. You're hurt, so I won't say anything now. But once you recover, you need to fire this nanny. As Becky went to the kitchen to get him coffee, he added, Charles's mother used to work as a maid for a wealthy family. He grew up in the servants' quarters. After his mother died in an accident when he was 15, the family kicked him out. He's been through a lot since then. We never talked about it, but I knew Charles had some bitterness about people working as nannies. After we married, he told me he didn't want anyone else in the house and wouldn't let me hire help. His work kept him too busy, leaving me to clean the whole house myself. I used to love him and was willing to sacrifice for him. But now, as I prepared to divorce him, how could I possibly agree to such demands? I no longer bothered to cater to his fragile feelings. I'm the one paying for the nanny? Who are you to make decisions about her? Charles had never heard me speak to him this way before. He hesitated, leaning back on the couch. I understand you're upset with me, but I'm a lawyer. I have to fight for my client's best interests. When I didn't reply, he continued, Though Zach won the case, the amount of compensation is too much. I'm here to ask you to withdraw the compensation request. His words made me, who had planned to calmly discuss the divorce, laugh in disbelief. Charles, what do you take me for? He furrowed his brow, confused. What are you talking about now? After a brief silence, he added, Zach just finished school, and this situation has been tough on him. Caroline's parents care deeply for him, and no one has been sleeping well these past 2 months. Suddenly, the pain in my wounds intensified, making it hard to breathe, but Charles didn't notice. He pressed on, If it was anyone else, I wouldn't ask this. But Jessica, we have money. Just sign a forgiveness letter and drop the compensation. Their family has been through enough. I couldn't take it anymore. I slapped Charles across the face, which helped ease my breathing slightly, but it still wasn't enough. I pulled up the hem of my pants, showing him my right leg from knee to ankle, swollen and covered in dark purple bruises. Despite 2 months passing, the scars were still visible. I lifted my shirt, exposing bruises on my stomach from the accident's impact. Look at this. Look at what I endured. I was in a coma for 2 days, and without quick intervention, my right leg would have been amputated. Charles, having been slapped, was about to burst with anger, but when he saw my injuries, he immediately straightened up. Where were you when I had the accident? Where were you when I was in so much pain I thought I'd die? You were too busy helping Caroline, scheming to get Zach off the hook. His eyes filled with tears, and he reached out to touch my wounds, but I slapped his hand away. You don't deserve to be my husband, or even a lawyer. Didn't you see the plaintiff's name? You were right at the hospital door and didn't even check if I was the one who got hit. Are you even human? Charles stood up and crouched in front of me. How could your injuries be this severe? His voice shook with fear. Believe me, I didn't know it was you who got hurt until today. You called me so many times after the accident, but I was busy. I thought you were just angry about Caroline, so I blocked you and didn't come home. His voice lowered as he realized how empty his explanation sounded. Jessica, I know I was wrong. You can hit me, you can scream at me. He reached out, trying to hold me, but I pushed his arms away. I don't want to hear anything except the word divorce. As soon as I said that, the door opened and my parents walked in, their faces filled with concern. The shock hit me, and all the tears I had been holding back suddenly flowed. Charles, who had always acted confidently around Ryan and Diana, stood up quickly. Diana, you're back. You should have let me know so I could have picked you up. My father, Ryan, ignored Charles's outstretched hand and sneered. You're a well-known lawyer, Charles. We didn't want to bother you. Charles was sent away by Ryan. Jessica, it's our fault, Ryan said. We made you suffer like this. I hadn't lowered my pants yet, and when Diana saw my injuries, she burst into tears, holding me tightly. Ryan removed his glasses, wiping his own eyes. Ryan and Diana, both researchers who worked on top-level national projects, were often unreachable. From a young age, I understood they couldn't always be there when I needed them. The day of the accident, Charles ignored my calls, and Ryan and Diana were in a critical phase of their project and couldn't be reached. I had to endure the pain alone and sign the surgery consent form by myself. During my hospital stay, I slowly began to see why Ryan had been so against me marrying Charles. He was tall, handsome, and ambitious, but beyond that, he had no redeeming qualities. His background was less than ideal, and after we married, people gossiped about him. To avoid upsetting Charles, I always suppressed my temper and met his demands. Despite my patience and tolerance, he never appreciated it. After Caroline re-entered his life, Charles often neglected me for her. On my birthday, he took her to the hospital because she wasn't feeling well. On our anniversary, he went to fix her electrical issues because she was afraid of the dark. Charles forgot countless promises and returned home later and later. I couldn't take it anymore and began snapping at him. Before the accident, Charles and I had been in a cold war for a week because of Caroline. On his birthday, I planned to visit him at work to reconcile. But on the way, a car swerved and hit me. I'll never forget the fear before the ambulance arrived, but the physical pain didn't compare to the emotional numbness I felt after Charles's 2-month silence. Seeing him defend Zach in court, distorting the truth without shame, was even worse. I had been so naive to defy my parents and marry Charles, thinking I was proving them wrong. Now, everything that happened was because of my poor decision. It was my fault for choosing him. Bianca told my parents everything. Ryan sat beside me, his eyes red and swollen. As a child, I often resented Ryan and Diana, feeling unloved like I was an orphan. As I grew older, I understood how much they had done for me, but the emotional gap wasn't easily bridged. I didn't know how to share my married life with them. Ryan told me how they came back so quickly. Bianca had been trying to contact them since the day I was hospitalized. They were able to return after their project reached its final stage. Jessica, what are you thinking now? Ryan asked. After hesitating for a moment, I decided to be honest. I want a divorce. I also want to continue seeking justice for myself. Ryan nodded, unusually supportive. Focus on getting better. Let Diana and me handle everything else. No one should push you around, but don't let anyone take advantage of you either. Before the trial, I had already decided to end my marriage, so I gradually asked Bianca to help move or discard my things from the marital home. I had no intention of going back there. That evening, Charles called again. I didn't answer, but I sent him a message urging him to sign the divorce papers as soon as possible. He didn't reply. The next day, I went for my follow-up appointment at the hospital. Somehow, Caroline found out and blocked my way when I left the consultation room. Jessica, what did you do? Why hasn't Charles returned my calls since last night? The nanny had gone to get my medication, and I couldn't move well in my wheelchair. In a careless moment, Caroline pushed me toward the stairwell. What are you doing? I exclaimed. She pushed me to the edge of the stairs and squatted in front of me, pressing her hand against my injury. Why didn't Zach finish you off? If Charles doesn't love you, why are you still holding on to him? This was the first time I was alone with Caroline since I learned she was Charles's girlfriend. Though I had gathered information about her, nothing had prepared me for this side of her. As I stared into Caroline's eyes filled with madness, I steadied my voice and said, I've already given Charles the divorce papers. Once he signs them, we'll be divorced. Caroline seemed to remember what she had seen the day before and let go of my leg, her expression flickering with confusion. Charles has never ignored my calls before, but since last night, I haven't been able to get through to him, she muttered. I sensed Caroline was unstable, and each of her words made me cautious in my responses. You could go to his office to find him, I suggested. Caroline stood and I began to relax, thinking she was leaving. But just as I did, she grabbed my wheelchair again. I heard you almost lost your leg. If you fell from here, your leg would be ruined. Charles would never want you then, she sneered, pushing the wheelchair forward. The sudden jolt made it tip over, but I grabbed the handrail just in time, preventing myself from falling. My injured leg slammed into the rail, sending a sharp pain through my body, and I broke out in a cold sweat. Seeing that her plan had failed, Caroline's expression darkened. She was about to approach me again when the door below flew open, and voices echoed through the stairwell. Without a word, Caroline bolted. When we arrived at the police station, I was still in shock. Ryan and Diana, who had rushed over upon hearing the news, were devastated to see the new bruises on my arm. Where's the surveillance footage? Why haven't you arrested her yet? Ryan demanded, his face filled with rage. I had never seen him so angry. The station chief, whom Ryan had called ahead of time, wasn't angry, but wore a helpless expression. Ryan, the footage clearly shows Jessica being pushed into the stairwell, but the cameras inside were fake. We can't confirm what happened once she was inside, the chief explained, trailing off. We all knew what that meant. Without clear evidence, we couldn't prove Caroline's guilt or verify what I said. Despite his years working on high-level projects, in that moment, Ryan was just another powerless person. I wasn't sure what strings Ryan pulled, but as we left the station, a black car trailed us home. Jessica, you can't go out alone for a while. Be extra cautious, Diana warned, her face tense with worry. I nodded, understanding her concern. Before long, my phone rang. It was Charles, and this time, I answered. I wanted to tell him everything that had happened. Jessica, what did you say to Caroline? Why was she crying when she saw me? His accusatory tone stung. I calmly explained what had taken place at the hospital, but halfway through he cut me off. Caroline would never do that. If you're trying to stir up trouble, you're going about it the wrong way. For a brief moment, I doubted whether the events of the day were real, but the pain in my leg reminded me they were. Caroline did it intentionally, Charles. People might lie, but God sees everything. Tell her not to leave any evidence behind or I won't let this go, I warned him. Realizing Charles wouldn't easily agree to a divorce, I started contacting divorce attorneys, ready to take the case to court. However, Ryan's connections proved even more powerful than I had imagined. He brought in two prominent lawyers from Washington to handle both my car accident case and the divorce. Thanks to him, I could focus solely on my recovery without worrying about anything else. When I received another court summons, Charles called me again. This time, I didn't ignore it. I wanted to hear what he had to say. Over the past few weeks, Charles had been calling me multiple times a day, but I had refused to answer. He even came to my building, but he never made it to my floor. I only learned about his visits from Ryan and Diana, who casually mentioned them. Jessica, does it really have to end like this? Charles asked, his voice weary. Bianca had visited me earlier and shared how things weren't going well for him. After we married, many people had given Charles legal work because of Ryan's influence. He rarely discussed his job, so I hadn't realized that, over the years, he'd taken cases from his competitors, relying on Ryan's reputation. He had even used Ryan's authority to intimidate people in court. But since news of our divorce spread, those who once supported Charles had abandoned him, and those he had wronged in the past were now making his life difficult. Charles had been under immense pressure lately. I told you, I won't spare you or Caroline's family, I said, my voice cold. His tone shifted, tinged with bitterness. Jessica, I swear, Caroline and I aren't what you think. If you don't like her, I won't see her anymore. Please tell Ryan to ease up on me. After 3 years of marriage, this was the first time Charles had spoken to me so softly. But I was no longer falling for it. You know exactly what you've done, I replied. Didn't you defend Zach, claiming he was innocent? Let's see how well you can manipulate things now. A month later, we faced each other in court once more. The Washington lawyers systematically dismantled Charles's defense of Zach from the last trial. Zach, who had been spoiled his entire life, stood no chance against them. As the truth came to light, Charles was left speechless. Zach cursed me from across the room, yelling, "You should have floored the gas that day. Too bad you didn't kill me." His words didn't faze me, but I noticed Charles's face fall, and Caroline sobbed uncontrollably in the audience. I couldn't help but smile. Just then, the lawyer announced that a witness was waiting outside. When a young man entered, Zach's face turned pale. He had been drinking with us at lunch that day, but no one expected him to be the driver. With the judge and lawyers asking questions, Zach's lies were exposed. Driving under the influence, hitting me, fleeing the scene, and hiding the truth. In the end, Zach was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay over $1 million in medical bills, emotional damages, and other expenses. Only a month ago, Zach and Carolyn had flaunted their power, using Charles to protect them. But now Zach was led away in handcuffs, and Carolyn wept uncontrollably. The weight on my chest lifted. After the trial, Carolyn rushed to Charles's side, but he didn't focus on her. Instead, he came to me, kneeling in front of me. "Is this what you wanted?" he asked, his face a mix of emotions. But all I said was, "It's not over yet." Charles, perhaps overconfident or unaware, was shocked when he found out his law license had been revoked. "Jessica, what have you done?" he demanded. I was at the hospital doing rehab with Ryan and Diana when I got the call. I just fulfilled my duty as a citizen, destroying evidence and breaking professional ethics. I simply reported the truth. You got what you deserved. Becky didn't recognize Caroline and was about to ask who she was looking for. But Caroline barged past her and stepped into the house. "What are you doing here?" and I asked, frowning. Caroline smiled, though there was an icy edge in her eyes. "Jessica, you're really hard to find." I could tell Caroline had something on her mind, but I couldn't guess what it was. Diana, hearing the commotion, came out of the room. I gave her a discreet signal to call the police, and she quickly understood. Caroline hadn't noticed Diana's presence and glared at me with contempt. If Charles hadn't paid the compensation, my parents would have sold me off to some old divorced guy, she spat, blaming me. I noticed several bruises on Caroline's exposed skin, but what did that have to do with me? "Your parents favor Zach and treat you like an object. Why take your anger out on me? You should be confronting them." I knew provoking her wasn't the smartest move, but her emotional manipulation was testing my patience. From what I knew, Caroline's family wasn't struggling financially. They simply didn't want to part with their money, so they targeted her instead. "It's your fault," she shouted. "Why won't you let Charles go? He loves me. If my parents hadn't tricked me into coming back home, I would have married him." Her voice broke as she started sobbing. Caroline was delicate, beautiful, and had a fragile demeanor, which made her seem so different from me. I could understand why Charles was drawn to her. "You'll be with him soon enough. Once Charles signs the divorce papers, you two can get married in a month," I said. Despite wanting to avoid more conflict, I realized Caroline's unstable mind made her unpredictable. It wasn't worth putting my safety on the line by engaging with her. She suddenly stopped crying and seemed lost in thought. After a moment, she whispered to herself, "I need Charles to sign quickly. He loves me. I've given him everything. He has to marry me." Then she left quietly. Once I heard the door close, Diana came out. "Did she do anything to you?" she asked while comforting the shaken nanny. I shook my head to reassure her. "Did you call the police?" I was concerned the authorities might think we had overreacted since Caroline left without causing further trouble. "I didn't call the police, just Ryan," Diana replied. "He said there are people watching downstairs, and if anything happened, they'd step in right away." I hadn't realized Ryan's team was still around. Hearing this gave me some peace of mind. That evening, after Charles lost his license, he called me. "Jessica, now that I'm no longer a lawyer, do you think I'm not good enough, and that's why you want the divorce?" I couldn't help but laugh at his reasoning. "You did this to yourself. Why would I have anything to do with it? And you keep claiming you won't contact Caroline anymore, So why did you pay the compensation? The silence on the other end told me Charles hadn't known what Caroline had said to me earlier that day. Jessica, Charles stammered, his voice hoarse. I could hear him searching for a justification. Feeling sorry for him, I pushed. Just sign the divorce papers already. Caroline is still waiting for you to marry her. I hung up, feeling indifferent. Whether he signed or not no longer mattered. The divorce was inevitable. The next day, I received a package. Inside was the divorce agreement I had originally given Charles, signed with no objections regarding the division of assets. Seeing his signature brought a sense of relief. I informed Charles of the court date and immediately told Ryan and Diana. Although my injury had mostly healed after 3 months, they were still hesitant to let me go anywhere alone. The next morning at 10, Ryan and Diana accompanied me to the courthouse. Charles was there, wearing a black coat and looking noticeably thinner. Ryan, Charles greeted my father, but Ryan and Diana ignored him, pushing my wheelchair into the courthouse. As the only one in a wheelchair, I felt out of place. But with Ryan and Diana by my side, I didn't feel as vulnerable. The courthouse staff and other visitors gave us curious looks, whispering amongst themselves. Their gazes shifted to Charles with clear disapproval. Charles's expression darkened, but under Ryan's watchful eyes, he didn't dare say a word. He quietly completed the process, and a month later, the divorce would be finalized. Hearing the confirmation brought a sense of freedom. We left the courthouse laughing, not sparing Charles a glance. A month passed quickly. Ryan and Diana had to return to their jobs, but before leaving, Ryan arranged extra security, fearing something might go wrong. On the day the divorce was finalized, Charles hadn't shown up yet. Just as I was about to message him, I saw him arrive with Caroline by his side, dressed in white. I realized Caroline must have convinced Charles to marry her the same day our divorce was confirmed. Caroline greeted me cheerfully, asking if the man with me was my new boyfriend. Of the four of us, only Caroline seemed at ease. The bodyguard David, whom Ryan had hired, glared at her, making her go silent. Charles looked like he wanted to say something, but in the end, he kept quiet. The divorce process was quick, and as soon as it was done, I wanted nothing more than to distance myself from them. Caroline, however, moved faster, immediately beginning the process to register her marriage with Charles. The staff looked at them with disdain, then turned to me with sympathy. I didn't pay much attention and signaled David to take me home. By then, I no longer needed the wheelchair, and though my legs still hurt slightly, I could walk slowly. After nearly recovering, I expressed my desire to return to work, but Ryan and Diana insisted I wasn't fully healed and made sure Becky kept me from going out. If I hadn't married Charles, I might have been well into my career by now. But I didn't dwell on regrets. After the divorce, I started revisiting the knowledge I'd gained in college. Though I had no intention of dedicating my life to research like Ryan and Diana, my failed marriage changed my perspective. I realized devoting myself to a long-term goal wasn't such a bad idea. I began studying for exams, refusing Ryan and Diana's offers of help because I wanted to achieve something on my own. 3 months after the divorce, Bianca casually brought up Charles again, mentioning that Caroline had taken all his money and run off. Curious, I asked for more details. It turned out that Caroline had been married before, though she never obtained a legal certificate. She even had a child with her former partner. When her child fell ill, she reconnected with Charles, reeling him back in. Once they were married, she demanded control over his finances, but Charles was careful. He treated her as he had treated me, giving her a set allowance each month. However, when her child's medical expenses became urgent, Caroline resorted to poisoning Charles's food with a slow-acting toxin. Charles fell ill and was hospitalized, during which time Caroline accessed his bank accounts and drained them. Then, she disappeared without a trace. Listening to Bianca, I realized Charles had gotten what he deserved. After sharing this story, she moved on to other office gossip. Charles's fate no longer concerned me. He and the past events were behind me, and I was ready to live my life on my own terms.